There's a grassy square in northeast Philadelphia where school children in uniforms cross the lawn each morning. An opera company stores its scenery in the buildings around it. It looks like an ordinary business park. But 6 feet under that lawn, Army crews drilled the soil and found lead poisoning the ground, liquid mercury pooled inside 2 buildings, and dirt so radioactive they trucked it out to South Carolina. This place was once called the street that beat Hitler. 22,000 people worked here. Then it closed in a single day, and crews burned the buildings to make it safe. Why? The place is the Frankford Arsenal, and for 161 years it made the bullets America fired in nearly every war it fought. It started small. In 1816, under President James Madison, the Army bought about 20 acres on the bank of Frankford Creek, near where the creek meets the Delaware River. The location wasn't an accident. Philadelphia's seaport was easy to defend. The site sat a short haul from the DuPont black powder mills on the Brandywine, and it was far enough from the crowded parts of the city that the Army felt safe storing gunpowder there. The first permanent thing they built wasn't a barracks or an office. It was a wharf, because everything this place would ever do depended on moving powder and metal by water. They laid out 4 stone buildings around an open square for drills. That square is still there today. For its first decades, it was a quiet depot. Soldiers stored weapons here, cleaned them, repaired them, and shipped them back out. Then the mission changed, and the change is what mattered. By the 1840s, Frankford was not just storing ammunition. It was making it percussion caps by the thousands, 40,000 lead balls a day. In 1851, a major named Philip Hagner took charge and built the arsenal's first steam-powered plant, a factory that could turn out percussion caps in a single operation. That is the moment a storage yard quietly became an industrial machine. And an industrial machine has to keep running. Then the country split apart. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the arsenal's own commander, Josiah Gorgas, resigned and went south. He became chief of ordnance for the Confederacy in deference to his Alabama-born wife. The man who had been running the Union's ammunition arsenal spent the war arming the enemy. Behind him, Frankford ran day and night, and by the war's end, more than 1,000 people worked there, turning out muskets, fuses, and cartridges for the army Gorgas had just left. The arsenal never went back to being small. By 1892, a Philadelphia newspaper called it Uncle Sam's strong right arm. It covered 70 acres. It produced 7 million cartridges a year. Every round it made carried 2 letters stamped into the base of the case, F.A., the arsenal's signature, scattered across the ammunition of a nation. That was the strength. It was also the trap. Frankford had become, for long stretches, the single most important source of small arms ammunition in the United States, a place built around one federal mission, a place that only made sense as long as that mission continued. Nobody was thinking about that yet. There were wars coming, and the arsenal was about to grow into something almost impossible to imagine. The 20th century turned Frankfurt into something the founders never could have pictured. When America entered the First World War, the arsenal's cartridges went to France by the millions. But scale brought its first scandal. In 1917, reports at the time claimed that trace amounts of potassium bromate and free sulfur had contaminated the manufacturing, and rounds began to misfire and hang fire at the front. Reportedly, as much as 1/3 of the American cartridges in France. There was a recall. The arsenal that armed the country had shipped ammunition that failed when soldiers pulled the trigger. Then it fixed the problem and kept growing. Nothing compared to what came next. In 1942, at the peak of the Second World War, 22,000 people worked at the Frankfurt Arsenal. Many of them were women. They came in from South Philadelphia and across the city, working around the clock on conveyors heaped with brass shell casings that clacked and clattered through the night. There was a street inside the complex the workers themselves nicknamed the street that beat Hitler. The numbers behind that name are staggering. Reports credit Frankfurt with producing on the order of 1.5 billion rounds. At one point, effectively every small-caliber round American troops fired in the European and Pacific theaters carried that FA head stamp on its base. This was no longer a factory. It was a city inside a city. Frankfurt had its own police force, its own fire department, its own dining halls, its own motor pool, its own full medical facility. To the people of Bridesburg living in its shadow, it was never the arsenal. It was just the arsenal, the place their aunts and uncles walked into before sunrise, and the paycheck the whole neighborhood was built around. And it wasn't only muscle. Inside were the Pittman-Dunn laboratories, one of the most advanced weapons research operations in the country. The recoilless rifle of the Second World War came out of Frankfurt. So did the Arsenal's optical shop, reportedly one of the best in America at grinding the precision glass for military binoculars and rangefinders. Later, its engineers worked on laser-guided ballistics and a rocket-powered ejection seat for aircraft. The place that stamped bullets was also a brain. That's the contradiction the neighborhood lived inside. The work meant stable pay in a blue-collar corner of Philadelphia. It also meant lead styphnate and mercury and explosive residue, handled every day by people who trusted that the ground beneath them was fine. The pride was real. The danger was real. Both were invisible from the street. For a while, everyone assumed it would last forever. Why wouldn't it? A place that had armed the Union, armed 2 world wars, and then armed Korea. A place with its own hospital and its own fire trucks. A place that had survived every enemy the United States had ever faced. But the strength was still the trap. Frankfurt only mattered as long as the country needed a single federal arsenal cranking out its ammunition. And by the 1960s, the military was quietly handing more and more of that work to private industry. The workforce that hit 22,000 in 1942 was shrinking. Nobody in Bridesburg wanted to look at that number too closely. In a Pentagon office, someone already had, and they were reaching for a pen. In November 1974, the Department of Defense announced that the Frankfurt Arsenal would close. The work would move to Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois. It was part of a wave of post-Vietnam consolidation, and to the people who worked there, it made no sense at all. The Army called Frankfurt outdated, but Rock Island had been built during the Civil War. The plant that had beaten Hitler was being scrapped in favor of one, older than the machine guns it once fed. The city fought. Mayor Frank Rizzo, whose blue-collar political base included the arsenal's own workers, led the effort to keep it open. Philadelphia officials drafted a rebuttal. It didn't matter. A confidential letter from Army Secretary Howard Callaway, later made public, said the Army had no intention of even reviewing the city's case. The decision was final. Inside the arsenal, workers checked the newspapers every day to find out whether they still had jobs. Then came the promise. During the 1976 campaign, Vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale stood in front of the Frankfurt Arsenal and pledged that if Jimmy Carter won, the arsenal would stay open. Carter and Mondale won. The arsenal closed anyway. The order had already been fast-tracked, and the promise became the most famous proof that nothing could stop it. The Army boasted that workers would transfer to Rock Island or the Philadelphia Naval Base. The Philadelphia Daily News called them phony transfers. The reporters found that almost none of the workers they interviewed intended to move. Housing near Rock Island was inflated. The only affordable homes were 60 miles out, and the town, one account said, felt desolate. The arsenal's top scientists left the Army for good. The last thing Frankfurt ever built was a sighting system for submarines and tanks, finished on June 25, 1977. On September 30th, The arsenal shut its production lines after 161 years. The very next day, it was handed to the General Services Administration to be sold. A century and a half of national defense became surplus real estate overnight. Then the ground gave up its secrets. Liquid mercury had pooled inside buildings 64 and 68. There was radiological contamination, uranium-tainted soil, PCBS, asbestos, and explosive residue soaked into the sewers of the old lead-styphnate works. The Army excavated the poisoned dirt and shipped contaminated sand all the way to Barnwell, South Carolina. They set fire to 32 buildings on purpose, controlled burns to destroy the explosive traces before anyone could reuse the site. They called the cleanup finished in 1980. It wasn't. In 2006, a far larger investigation of the soil and groundwater began. Crews pulled more than 1,600 nickel-cadmium batteries out of the earth. They drilled the old parade ground, the ceremonial heart of the place, and found lead in the soil above 1,000 milligrams per kilogram. As late as 2025, the government was still filing 5-year reviews on whether the ground was safe. The mission died in a day. The poison took half a century. Today, the survivors are strange, a meatpacking company, 2 charter schools at the gate, children in uniforms crossing that same parade ground, an opera company storing its scenery, a boat ramp on the northern edge where the Army once stored powder. Under the grass where those children walk, archaeologists found the foundations of the original 1817 barracks, buried and forgotten. The gate still stands. The bullets that beat Hitler are gone. What's left is the ground, still being tested, still not entirely clean.